The emergency sirens pierced through the morning mist at Serenity Ridge National Park, their wailing echoes bouncing off granite cliffs as park rangers rushed past stunned tourists with bullhorns. All visitors must evacuate immediately. The command crackled through static-filled radios, while families scrambled to pack their tents, children crying as parents grabbed whatever they could carry. Within hours, the parking lots that had been overflowing with RVs and cars stood eerily empty, yellow caution tape fluttering in the mountain breeze like funeral ribbons. The chaos had started 3 days earlier, when 17 disabled campers from the Horizons Adaptive Recreation Program had arrived for their annual summer retreat. Marcus Williams, a former Marine who'd lost his legs in Afghanistan, navigated his wheelchair through the accessible campsite with practiced ease, his weathered hands adjusting the brake as he watched his group set up their specialized equipment. Sarah Chen, blind since birth, ran her fingers along the rope guides they'd installed between tents, her guide dog Pepper padding silently beside her as she helped organize the camp kitchen. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Marcus called out to David Rodriguez, who was securing his portable oxygen concentrator near his tent. David, a retired teacher battling COPD, smiled and gave a thumbs up, too breathless from the altitude to speak, but his eyes bright with anticipation for the week ahead. The group had been coming to Serenity Ridge for 5 years, their annual retreat becoming something of a local tradition. They'd partnered with the Park Service to develop accessibility improvements, installed tactile trail markers for visually impaired hikers, and even helped design the first fully accessible backcountry camping site in the national park system. Local businesses had grown to depend on their week-long stay, the disabled campers proving to be enthusiastic consumers of local crafts, guides, and equipment rentals. Karen Hoffman had been watching them from her rival camp across the meadow, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her coffee mug as she observed their morning routine through expensive binoculars. As director of Elite Wilderness Adventures, she'd been trying for 3 years to secure the prime camping permit that the Horizons group held, the choice location offering the best views and easiest access to the park's main attractions. Her own clients, wealthy executives paying premium prices for authentic wilderness experiences, had been complaining about having to settle for less desirable sites. "Look at them," she muttered to her assistant, Janet, who was setting up the camp's elaborate outdoor kitchen, complete with a professional-grade grill and wine refrigeration unit, taking up the best spot with their government handouts while real taxpayers get pushed to the margins. Janet shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "They seem like nice people, Karen, and they do a lot of good work here." "Nice." Karen's voice dripped with disdain. "They're a liability. All those medications, special equipment, accessibility modifications. They're disrupting the natural ecosystem. Mark my words, something's going to happen. And when it does, I'll make sure everyone knows who's really responsible." That evening, as the Horizons campers gathered around their fire pit for their traditional first-night storytelling session, Marcus noticed several dead fish floating in the stream that bordered their campsite. He wheeled closer to investigate, his military training kicking in as he scanned the area for potential hazards. The fish appeared to be native rainbow trout, their bodies showing no obvious signs of trauma or disease. "Sarah, can you help me get a sample of this water?" he called out, his voice carefully controlled to avoid alarming the group. "Just want to run a quick field test." Sarah made her way over with her water testing kit, something the group always carried as part of their environmental stewardship program. The pH readings came back normal, oxygen levels appeared adequate, and there were no obvious chemical odors. "Could be natural die-off," she suggested, though her trained ecologist's instincts told her something wasn't quite right. Meanwhile, Karen had been conducting her own investigation, though with far different intentions. Using her phone's camera, she documented the dead fish from multiple angles, then began photographing the Horizons campsite with particular focus on their medical waste disposal container and medication storage area. Her mind was already spinning the narrative she would craft, the story that would finally give her the ammunition she needed to discredit the group and claim their coveted permit. The next morning brought the discovery of 3 dead squirrels near the trailhead, their bodies positioned in clear view of passing hikers. Karen was among the first to find them, her shocked gasps drawing attention from other early morning visitors. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What could cause this? We need to find out what's killing the wildlife." By noon, rumors were spreading through the park like wildfire. Hikers whispered about potential disease outbreaks. Parents pulled their children away from the streams, and several families began packing up their campsites. Karen moved through the crowds like a concerned citizen, carefully planting seeds of suspicion without making direct accusations. "I just heard the disabled campers have been disposing of medical waste improperly," she confided to a group of worried parents. "All those medications and chemicals. Who knows what they're dumping into our pristine wilderness?" The whispers grew louder when a park maintenance worker reported finding a dead deer near the accessible trail that the Horizons group frequently used. By evening, Karen had collected enough evidence and decided it was time to escalate. She placed her call to 911 from her satellite phone, her voice trembling with perfectly calculated distress. "This is Karen Hoffman at Serenity Ridge National Park. I need to report an environmental emergency. There's been massive wildlife poisoning, and I have reason to believe it's connected to a group of disabled campers who have been improperly disposing of toxic medical waste and medications. Fish, squirrels, deer, they're all dying, and it's spreading fast. This could be a public health catastrophe." The 911 dispatcher, trained to take all environmental emergencies seriously, immediately contacted the Park Service, the State Environmental Protection Agency, and the Centers for Disease Control. Within 2 hours, Serenity Ridge was crawling with officials in hazmat suits, emergency vehicles blocking access roads, and media vans setting up satellite uplinks to broadcast the developing crisis to a nation hungry for dramatic news. Marcus watched in stunned disbelief as officers approached his campsite with seizure warrants, their faces hidden behind respirator masks, as if his group posed some kind of biological threat. "Sir, we need to confiscate all medications, medical equipment, and food supplies for immediate testing," the lead investigator announced, his voice muffled but authoritative. "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded, his lawyer instincts from his pre-military days kicking in. "We have permits. We follow all regulations, and we've never had any environmental violations. We've received credible reports of improper waste disposal and potential contamination," the officer replied, already signaling his team to begin the seizure. "You and your group need to evacuate immediately while we conduct our investigation." Sarah stood beside her tent, Pepper pressed against her legs as the dog sensed her distress. "This is insane," she whispered to David, who was frantically trying to explain to the officers that his oxygen concentrator was medically necessary and couldn't be confiscated without endangering his life. 30 minutes, the lead investigator announced. "Pack only personal clothing and essential documents. Everything else stays for testing." As the Horizons group was escorted from the park like common criminals, Karen watched from her premium campsite, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The first phase of her plan had worked perfectly. The news crews were already interviewing her as a concerned witness, and her carefully rehearsed statements about environmental responsibility and proper oversight were being broadcast to millions of viewers. "It's heartbreaking," she told the CNN reporter, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I feel terrible for these people. But we can't let sympathy override safety. Our national parks are treasures that need protection from irresponsible behavior, regardless of who's responsible. The story exploded across social media within hours. Wildlife poisoning began trending on Twitter, accompanied by Karen's carefully curated photographs of dead animals and accusations about uncontrolled medical waste, contaminating pristine wilderness areas. Conservative commentators seized on the story as evidence of government programs run amok, while others debated the balance between accessibility and environmental protection. By the end of the week, Serenity Ridge had become a ghost town. The tourist season, which generated over $40 million annually for the surrounding communities, collapsed overnight as fearful visitors canceled reservations and avoided the area entirely. Local restaurants that had been booked solid through Labor Day found themselves serving empty dining rooms, their refrigerators full of rotting food, as suppliers continued delivering to customers who never came. Maria Santos, who owned a small gift shop that catered primarily to park visitors, sat behind her cash register, staring at the deserted main street through her storefront window. 3 generations of her family had built their lives around the seasonal tourism economy. And now, she was facing bankruptcy as her savings drained away to cover rent and utilities for a business with no customers. 43 years, she murmured to her daughter Elena, who had driven up from Denver to help assess their options. 43 years building this place, and some crazy woman destroys it all with one phone call. Elena scrolled through the latest news updates on her laptop, her journalism background helping her spot inconsistencies in the official statements. Mom, something doesn't add up about this story. Look at these photos from the news reports. Then look at the dates on the social media posts. Some of these images were uploaded before the 911 call was even made. Meanwhile, at the State Environmental Laboratory, Dr. Amanda Foster was reviewing the test results from the seized materials with growing confusion. The water samples from the Horizons campsite showed no unusual contamination. The medical waste had been properly contained and disposed of according to all regulations, and the medication storage showed no signs of leakage or improper handling. Run the tests again, she instructed her team, unable to believe the results. Check for everything: heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, industrial chemicals, anything that could cause wildlife mortality. 3 days later, the results came back identical. The disabled campers' site was actually cleaner than most of the park. Their meticulous environmental practices evident in every sample. Dr. Foster picked up her phone to call the park superintendent, but hesitated when she remembered the media circus surrounding the case. False accusations were delicate matters, and she needed to be absolutely certain before making any statements that could further inflame the situation. That's when her colleague, Dr. James Liu, made the discovery that would change everything. He'd been analyzing the photographs that Karen had provided to authorities, using forensic imaging software to verify their authenticity. What he found made his blood run cold. "Amanda, you need to see this," he called out, his voice tight with excitement and anger. "These photos have been digitally manipulated. Look at this metadata. The timestamps don't match the alleged discovery dates, and there are clear signs of image composition where multiple photos have been merged together." Dr. Foster leaned over his shoulder, studying the screen as he highlighted the digital artifacts that revealed the deception. "My God," she breathed. "Someone staged this entire crisis. But who would do such a thing? And why?" The answer came when Elena Santos, working on her own investigation for a freelance article, uncovered Karen's business filings and discovered her repeated attempts to secure the Horizons Group's camping permit. Phone records showed that Karen had been in contact with several anti-disability advocacy groups, known for filing nuisance lawsuits against accommodation programs. Most damning of all, Elena found Karen's deleted social media posts from months earlier, venting her frustration about parasites taking advantage of taxpayer-funded programs and plotting to expose their real agenda. Armed with this evidence, Elena contacted Marcus Williams, who had spent the past 2 weeks in a Denver hotel fighting to clear his group's name and reputation. His lawyer, Patricia Kim, immediately filed for emergency injunctions and began preparing a massive defamation lawsuit while Marcus organized his community response. "They tried to destroy us," Marcus told the group during their video conference call, his voice steady, but his eyes burning with determination. "But we're going to fight back, not just for ourselves, but for every disabled person who's ever been discriminated against, and for every community that's been harmed by lies and manipulation." The breakthrough came when Dr. Foster's team discovered the real source of the wildlife deaths. A private mining operation upstream from the park had been illegally dumping processed water containing trace amounts of cyanide, the contamination moving downstream and concentrating in areas where animals gathered to drink. The company had been operating without proper permits for months, their activities coinciding exactly with the timeline of animal mortality. Karen's elaborate deception began unraveling when Senator Rebecca Martinez announced congressional hearings into the Park Service's handling of the crisis. As chairwoman of the Senate Subcommittee on National Parks, Martinez had received hundreds of letters from constituents demanding accountability for the economic devastation that had struck rural communities dependent on park tourism. The hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was packed with media, affected business owners, disability advocates, and park officials when Marcus Williams wheeled up to the witness table. Beside him sat Dr. Foster with her laboratory reports, Elena Santos with her investigative findings, and Patricia Kim with a thick folder of legal documents. "Senator Martinez, members of the committee," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down Taliban fighters and survived bureaucratic battles in the VA system. "My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here to tell you about a hate crime disguised as environmental concern." For the next 4 hours, the committee heard testimony that painted a devastating picture of deliberate deception and institutional failure. Dr. Foster presented the forensic evidence proving the photos had been faked, while Elena Santos walked through Karen's financial motives and history of discrimination. Patricia Kim detailed the civil rights violations and economic damages that had resulted from the false accusations. When Karen Hoffman was finally called to testify, she entered the hearing room flanked by expensive lawyers and wearing a carefully chosen outfit designed to project innocence and concern. Her opening statement attempted to portray herself as a whistleblower who had acted out of genuine environmental concern, but her credibility crumbled under Senator Martinez's methodical questioning. "Ms. Hoffman." The senator's voice cut through Karen's prepared responses like a blade. "Can you explain why these photographs show metadata, indicating they were taken 3 weeks before you claim to have discovered the dead wildlife?" Karen's face flushed red as she stammered through increasingly implausible explanations, her lawyers frantically passing notes and attempting to object to questions that were perfectly within the committee's jurisdiction. When confronted with evidence of her deleted social media posts and her business communications plotting against the disabled campers, she finally stopped speaking entirely, invoking her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The committee's final report, released 3 months later, became a landmark document in disability rights law. It detailed how a single individual's prejudice and greed had weaponized environmental concern to attack a vulnerable population, causing millions of dollars in economic damage and reinforcing harmful stereotypes about disabled Americans. Karen Hoffman faced a cascade of consequences that began with federal criminal charges for filing false police reports, mail fraud, and violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Justice Department's prosecution was relentless, presenting evidence of her elaborate scheme to a jury that deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. But the criminal prosecution was only the beginning. Patricia Kim's civil lawsuit resulted in a $47 million judgment against Karen and her company, compensating the disabled campers for defamation and emotional distress, while providing restitution funds for the businesses that had been devastated by the tourism collapse. Karen's assets, including her luxury home, vehicles, and business equipment, were seized to satisfy the judgment. The National Park Service implemented new protocols requiring independent verification of environmental emergency claims, while Congress passed the Marcus Williams Act, strengthening protections against discrimination in federal recreation programs and creating penalties for false reporting that targets protected populations. Most significantly, Karen was banned from all national parks, state parks, and federal recreation areas for life. Her name was added to a database shared among outdoor recreation providers, effectively ending her career in the wilderness tourism industry. The woman who had tried to exclude others from nature's bounty found herself permanently excluded from the very places she had claimed to protect. 1 year later, Serenity Ridge hosted the first annual Adaptive Recreation Festival, a 3-day celebration that drew disabled athletes, families, and allies from across the country. Marcus Williams served as the opening ceremony keynote speaker, his wheelchair positioned at the podium where senators and celebrities had once condemned the very community he represented. "This park belongs to all Americans," he declared to the crowd of thousands gathered in the meadow where Karen had once plotted their destruction. Not just the able-bodied, not just the wealthy, not just those who fit someone else's definition of deserving. Every person who loves the outdoors, who finds healing in wilderness, who wants to share these wonders with their children, they all belong here. Sarah Chen stood near the accessible trail markers that had been upgraded and expanded with funds from the lawsuit settlement, Pepper at her side as she listened to the applause echoing off the granite cliffs. The tactile path system now extended throughout the park, serving not just disabled visitors, but families with young children, elderly hikers, and anyone who needed additional guidance navigating the terrain. The economic recovery had been remarkable. Tourism numbers exceeded pre-crisis levels as the park became a destination for accessible outdoor recreation, drawing visitors who had never considered national parks within their reach. Maria Santos reopened her gift shop with an expanded line of adaptive outdoor gear, her business thriving as part of a new economy built on inclusion rather than exclusion. Dr. Foster received a prestigious Environmental Justice Award for her role in exposing the truth, while Elena Santos's investigative reporting won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing discrimination against disabled Americans. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the hundreds of disabled veterans, families with special needs children, and accessibility advocates who sent letters thanking them for refusing to accept injustice. The mining company responsible for the actual environmental contamination faced its own reckoning, paying unprecedented fines and implementing comprehensive remediation programs under court supervision. The real environmental threat had been addressed quietly and effectively once politics and prejudice were removed from the equation. As the sun set behind the peaks surrounding Serenity Ridge, casting golden light across the meadow where hundreds of tents now stood in perfect harmony, Marcus Williams reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Karen Hoffman's attempt to destroy their community had instead strengthened it, creating a network of allies and advocates that stretched far beyond the disabled community. The crisis had revealed both the worst and best of human nature. One person's hatred and greed had caused tremendous suffering, but it had also inspired countless others to stand up for justice, truth, and the fundamental principle that America's public lands belong to everyone. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but the community that gathered beneath them had been transformed, tempered by adversity into something stronger and more beautiful than before. In the end, Karen's legacy was not the exclusion she had sought, but the inclusion she had inadvertently created. Her name would be remembered, not as a protector of wilderness, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and the power of communities to overcome those who would divide them. The disabled campers she had tried to drive away had become permanent fixtures in the park's history, their presence a living testament to the truth that diversity makes every community stronger. The last campfire of the festival burned long into the night, surrounded by voices sharing stories, laughter, and songs that carried across the valley like prayers of gratitude for a battle won and a future secured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to celebration, to community, and to the quiet satisfaction of justice served beneath an endless canopy of stars.